Great. Well, it's 1 o'clock, so why don't we go ahead and get started? My name is Justin Reich, and along with Sam Wineburg and this terrific team here, we're thrilled to be able to welcome you to the first live meeting for Sorting Truth from Fiction, Civic Online Reasoning. Grateful to have people from all over the world here joining us to be together for a few minutes in the midst of this mostly asynchronous online course to connect with each other a little bit, ask some questions, and learn about learning together. As the webinar gets started, I'd invite you all to, as many of you have, please introduce yourself on the chat. It'd be great to know who you are and where you're from and what role you have in the organization you work with or what connection you have to searching online. And we can also start now populating the chat with questions that people have for the whole team about the course. The way this office hours setting is going to go is I'll have just, I'll do a round of introductions from the folks who are leading the course team. And then I'll have some logistical notes and some ideas about being successful and persisting as a learner in these courses. We'll interview Sam and his colleagues a little bit about the origins of the Civic Online Reasoning Research Project. And then we'll answer whatever questions folks have. So excited to have you all here. And why don't we get started with some brief introductions from the folks that are here. So I'm Justin Reich. I'm a former 9th grade world history teacher and taught electives to seniors. And in 2003, I taught in a one-to-one laptop classroom. That was not the first, but was relatively early on to give every student access to the internet. And I very quickly became just enthralled by all of the ways that I could connect folks in my classes to online resources, and realized just how incredibly important search and information literacy was going to be to the future of my students' success. And I've been thinking about that on and off ever since. Sam, can you introduce yourself, and then I'll just point to people as they appear in my list?
Sure. My name is Sam Wineburg. I am a professor at Stanford University. If I move my camera down, you will see that my small little Havanese terrier is sitting on my lap, because otherwise he will bark at me during this whole time and refuse to give me any kind of quiet during this webinar. So you might see him poke it up. And then way back, I was a high school teacher. And then when I moved into the professoriate, then I moved to Stanford, I founded what's known as the Stanford History Education Group. For those of you who are social studies teachers or familiar with the social studies, we have close to 10 million downloads of our various curricula. And since 2015, we've been working on this issue of trying to figure out how we can help people make heads and tails out of the stuff that they encounter on the internet.
Great. Joel, you're next on my list. Can you introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Joel Breakstone. I'm the director of the Stanford History Education Group. Before moving to SHEG more than a decade ago, I was a high school social studies teacher. It's really a pleasure to have a chance to talk with folks who are participating in this course. We're so excited that it is finally live.
And Teresa?
Hi everyone, I'm Teresa Ortega, also with SHEG, and I've been working on Civic Online Reasoning for the past 5 years with Joel and Sam, and really excited for you all to be taking the course and seeing this come to life.
And it's just been a tremendous privilege to work with Teresa and with Joel on developing all these materials. It's been really fun for those of us at MIT. Josh, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Joshua Lindbergh Tobias. I am a research scientist at the MIT Teaching Systems Lab. I also was a history major in my undergrad before I moved over to the dark side of data and statistical analysis. But I love history, and I had a lot of fun doing this course and learning more about SHEG's material and about Civic Online Reasoning. So I'm really excited about this course.
And Marvez?
Hello, everyone. My name is Marvez. I'm a graduate student at MIT in the Teaching Systems Lab, and I helped build the practice spaces that you see in the course with SHEG this summer, and it's been really cool to see all of the responses come into those spaces.
And Patrick?
Hi, I'm Patrick. I also was a high school teacher for 5 years at High Tech High Chula Vista in south of San Diego, where I currently live. I am currently the Director of Experience Design at the High Tech High Graduate School of Education. And I was helping manage the production line on the course, it's just been amazing to be able to work with these two great institutions and help get something out. This is my 23rd online course that I've worked on in the last decade. So very happy to say that.
That's great. That's great. That's a lot of experience. Good. So we just want you to see some of the faces and get to know some of us who are behind the development of the course. You'll probably see our names in various points in the forums as we respond to the great conversations that you're having there and looking at the terrific work that you're doing. And of course, you know, I've just been so impressed and gratified to see how much interaction there is amongst participants in the course already and people getting a lot of feedback on the assignments that they're submitting. And asking great questions and making great connections. So that's really exciting. You know, Wendy, who just introduces herself as a retired MIT engineer, pointing out that she doesn't have a classroom, but she's doing a whole lot with friends. And we're also seeing that with neighbors and kids and people in different adult associations. So for all of you who are finding creative ways of being able to do the assignments and do the learning experiences in the course with others, we think that's terrific. We kind of framed the course for people who are K-12 teachers, but we welcome anyone. And it's been fun to see how people are adapting these activities, both to the online opportunities and challenges of COVID times, and then for all the different roles that you have in society. Oh, and let's let Amelia introduce yourself as well.
Hi, sorry to be late to the event. Yeah, I'm Amelia. I'm a graduate student here at MIT. I'm working in the teaching systems lab as a research assistant and also helping TA this course. So really happy to be here with everyone. Great.
So let's just dive into a few logistical things first. If you haven't yet taken the pre-course survey, please do so. You'll find it at the top of the one of the earliest links in the course page, and it's invaluable to us to understand where people are coming from, and it's an important part of us learning what our participants are learning. When you share that information with us, we're able to learn more about how effective our courses are and what kinds of experiences people are having, and we're able to make them better in the future. So if you haven't yet taken the time to do the pre-course survey, we'd be very grateful if you would. As I hope most of you have seen, an organization that supported a bunch of our work, XQ, is making available a free coupon code for the course. So if you visit at the top of your navigation, again, the want to earn a free certificate section there, you'll see a whole bunch of instructions about how to use that coupon code. If you have not yet put yourself on the verified track, you can just take the coupon code and done that. If you paid for a certificate, you can get the one you paid for, or you don't pay for a certificate. You pay to be on the verified track, and then if you complete the whole course, you can earn a certificate. But if you already paid to be on the verified track, you can get a refund for that, and then you can use the coupon, but you have to do that within 14 days of the course starting. So there's just a few days left for that. And if anybody has any difficulties with that process or with anything else in the course, you should feel free to email us at cormooc2020@gmail.com, and we're happy to help you with any issues you come across, intellectual or logistical or otherwise. There are almost 3,000 learners who are registered for the course. They come from over 130 countries. They come from all kinds of schools, people working in all kinds of roles in K-12 and higher ed and lifelong learning. It's a really diverse group, so that's very, very exciting for us. And we'll do at least one more of these live events during the run of the course, which is a chance for us to get to know each other a little better. One of the things that you've probably observed is that most of the materials that predate the course from the COR website, and then just generally speaking, most of our approach to supporting teachers was developed in kind of pre-pandemic times. And so we're constantly thinking about how should we adapt our online learning experiences to support teachers who are now teaching in remote settings and teaching online. You know, we're going to continue to try to give suggestions about how to adapt all these materials to the new world that we're in. And we look forward to getting your feedback about how we're doing. As we, I have 3 main suggestions for you all about persisting and being successful in the course. One is a very logistical suggestion, which is that people who make time for themselves in the course often find that they're most successful in persisting. So if you haven't yet looked at your calendar and reserved some chunks of time each week to work on the course, you might consider doing that now. For the next few weeks, see if you can you know, reserve a morning or an afternoon or an evening or whatever it is, or a few lunch breaks throughout your week, or whatever you think would work best for you. Folks who kind of put some time in their calendar and reserve it for themselves in their own professional learning, that's one tool that helps people persist and be successful. We've also found that some social cohesion and peer support is another resource that helps people be successful in our courses. So if you're taking the course with colleagues, we think that's great. We have, again, in the top nav bar, some guidelines for what we call learning circles, people that get together in person or in smaller synchronous groups to be able to meet and discuss how the course is going. We would definitely encourage you all to form learning circles, or at least find other people to take the course with. It's not too late to start the course. Although we sort of recommend weekly deadlines, you can actually finish everything up right until the last day of the course, which I think right now is October 30th. And so it's not too late for people to come in and do Unit 1 and Unit 2 in a whole swoop and jump right in. So encourage your colleagues to participate, and we welcome all of them joining us. And then you may also want to think about how you can connect to other folks who have similar roles in you in organizations, or have similar, are from a similar geographic area. I saw in our chat today that 2 folks are from nearby each other in Maryland and could connect with one another. One simple way to look and learn a little bit more about who's around is to use the search function in the forums. So if you search for Toronto or teacher educator or math, you might find other learners with similar interests or contexts. And then we really do want to hear from you about your experiences and what's going on. Right now, most of the discussion is just happening right in there in the forum, which is great, and that's the best place for it to happen, and people can see each other. But you should also feel free to follow us on social media. We have 2 Twitter accounts, which I can put, well, the TSL team has a Twitter account, and the SHEG team has a Twitter account that we can put into the chat when I get a second. You're welcome to tweet at me at BJFR, and again, email us if you have any kinds of difficulties. So those are most of the logistical things that I wanted to touch on, and some suggestions for being successful in the course. And we'll spend the next 20 minutes or so just chatting about some more of the background and history of the SHEG research, and then answering any other questions that you have. So if there are questions that have come up as you've been working on the course, feel free to post them in the chat, and we can start talking about them there, and then I can ask them to all my colleagues here as we get going. But as a way to get started, I wanted to invite Sam to, by now in the course, if people have made it through Unit 1 or Unit 2, you've read about and learned about some of the really important recent and up-to-date findings from the research on Civic Online Reasoning. But Sam, I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about how you got started into this, how as someone who's done a lot of work in how people teach history, how did you get interested in how people search online?
So we were doing a whole bunch of research in different classrooms where students had followed our Reading Like a Historian curriculum, and they were honing their critical thinking skills, and they were making great progress at thinking about the source and where information came from when it was in a traditional print environment where sources were put in front of them. And we were working in one particular classroom where they were using Apple books to create their own textbook. And we saw something extremely interesting going on. Students who were really good critical thinkers with traditional print texts, when they went to the web to try to create their own textbook about the French Revolution, what seemed to determine their choices about what went in were the particular parameters of the templates of Apple iBook. And that the critical thinking of sources that we saw them display with our curriculum somehow got thrown out the window the minute they were in front of a screen. And that was the first kind of revelation for me. This was back in 2013, 2014. And it sort of hit me like a ton of bricks. Like, what's going on about seeing things on the web that is different from a traditional print experience? And then, you know, as so many things in life go on, we got a call one day from a program officer at the McCormick Foundation in Chicago, who had been a high school English teacher, but she worked with a group of social studies teachers who had seen our alternative assessments in history. And she said, would you be interested in creating an assessment to assess digital literacy? She told us that a whole bunch of the projects that foundation supported were projects that had kids creating websites and going on the web. And when they looked at the evaluation instruments, all of the projects were successful and all of the kids were more sophisticated.
They were all above average.
When they were all above average, and when they looked at the assessments, it was basically self-reports. Teachers saying, when my students participate in this, they are more likely to check their sources. And so we came up with an assessment, some were exercises were online, others which were taking material from the web. And that's really where it all started. We released our findings in October of 2016. We wrote, Sarah McGrew and I, a graduate student now at the University of Maryland, wrote a short op-ed, and then Trump was elected, and we were thrust into the eye of the storm. As Teresa and Joel can tell you, it was that 10 days of fame that where NPR and BBC and everybody was calling us, because essentially we had data that overthrew the widespread belief that just because young people are sophisticated in operating a device, they know how to use that device. So I'll end there because we're really interested in people's questions.
That's great, Sam. And as other folks have questions, please put them into the chat there and happy to discuss further. But I'll ask one to start with. Having read a bunch of your research now, one of the ways that you've tried to, you have the assessments that you do where you ask people to do tasks and you look at lots and lots of people and compare how different groups do well or not so well. But another thing that you do is watch people really closely as they participate in search, whether they're middle school students or Stanford freshmen or fact checkers. Sort of how did you come across, how did you develop that approach to studying search? Sort of where does it come from, and what do we learn from that we wouldn't learn from other means?
Well, it's a great question, Justin. When we looked at what people were saying about what young people could do or what most of us could do on the web, it was based on paper and pencil surveys. It was based on self-reports. It was based on kind of intranet experiences where you limit the information that people are exposed to. It's not the open web. And really the way to understand somebody's thinking processes as they're engaged in a complex task is to watch them think. And I have been doing this at least since 1989. That dates how old I am and explains why my hair is gray. When I first chanced upon the Think Aloud method, and I had professional historians think out loud, not about the conclusions they reached at the end of reading, but as they were actually reading, articulating their thoughts as they were trying to build historical interpretation. And I talked about it way back when as the intermediate processes of cognition. What are the kinds of alleyways and sometimes blind alleys we enter into before coming to a conclusion? And that was a method that we used when we opened up our laptop and gave some professional fact checkers a series of different kinds of tasks on the web and watched how they wended their way through the network of linked sources in order, in sometimes less than a half a minute, come to a warranted conclusion that at the time, other very smart people got spun around in circles and at the end of 5 minutes didn't know where they were.
So it's that process of really saying, like, how does, not just what are the ends of our thinking, but what does the middle of thinking happen, and what can we learn from that? That's great. So Corto asks a question that you all have done some studies in the USA. What do we know about other jurisdictions? What do we know about places in the world? Have you all done studies in other places, or have you found similar researchers in other parts of the world?
Just very briefly, the idea that we overestimate young people's ability to come to sound decisions about what they find on the web are findings that have been repeated in Australia, that have been repeated in Sweden, have been repeated in a variety of places. I don't know of any studies that say, wow, young people without special kind of instruction are really whizzes at finding their way through some very sophisticated and often extremely, extremely smart and deceptive sources. So we haven't seen any counter evidence, but we have a lot of evidence from a lot of different places that we all need help with this, that the technology has become so sophisticated, it's exceeded our own ability to keep up with it.
We got a question in the Q&A from Allison, who says, I'm curious about the baseline activity for your students. Have you considered including a more reputable website among, I think it's a task about a reputable website among the less trustworthy ones, because my students seem to be skeptical of everything. What do you make of the kind of universal skepticism? What do you think would happen? What happens when you give students tasks where you say, this is a pretty reputable website? Do they still go, no, nothing can be trusted?
Well, so there are two real problems with that. The first is the idea that you can look at something and tell whether it's true and trustworthy and whether it should be rejected. And one of the sources that we use in our face-to-face training, or now it's become online, but I encourage anybody who's teaching this to do this, and you can write to us and we can give you the reference for it, is a source about arsonist birds. Birds in Australia that contributed to the fires there by picking up a twig that was burning from a field and putting it in another field in order to essentially be flying arsonists. It looks outrageous, and often it is repeated in memes that look really, really sketchy. But it turns out that this comes from a National Geographic story, that there's scientific papers about it, that this is well established. So the idea that you can look at something, rely only upon your powers of critical thinking to know whether it's true or false, is something that we immediately try to help students understand they cannot do. The second part of the question is also really, really important. And here I'll invoke our colleague, Mike Caulfield, who talks about this problem of trust compression. When all sources are biased and no source can be trusted, you are exactly putting yourself in the hands of those architects of Russian, Soviet disinformation, that wants everybody to kind of throw their hands up in the air and say, you can't trust anything. When students reject the Pew Foundation and the Mayo Clinic in the same breath as they reject miracle cures for COVID, then you know we are really in a place where they are susceptible to all kinds of digital snake oil salesmen. So no, trust compression is a problem, and it relates to the kind of background knowledge we have to help students gain, which is, what is the difference between the Wall Street Journal and Breitbart? That is something, traditional knowledge, background knowledge about sources is something that we have to teach, because our 7th graders and our 11th graders do not come in knowing those kinds of things.
Speaking of background knowledge, this was a question that has come up a number of times in the course forums. People doing the lateral reading exercise, learning about lateral reading and saying, well, lateral reading seems great, but it also seems like you need a lot of background knowledge for lateral reading to work. What advice do you have for folks sort of thinking through, the kinds of reasoning that happens in the next steps after opening a new tab?
So they're absolutely right if they raise that question, and it's a little bit overstated. So let's just I'll quickly enumerate the different types of background knowledge that make an adult who's been living on the planet for 40 years and has a lot of stuff in their head, why they are in general, once they've been taught how to laterally read, why they generally are more successful than a 12-year-old. First of all, you need to know a lot of content knowledge, the traditional stuff that school teaches you. So, if you're looking at a website that claims to offer dispassionate information about the minimum wage, and you understand something about interest groups and influence peddling and the way that lobbying goes on, then you're in a better position to kind of see through that when you check out that source in another tab. That's the traditional content. When you're looking at claims about vaccinations, if you know something about the biology of vaccinations and you know something about statistics, you are in a better situation to laterally read than a seventh grader who doesn't know that stuff. Second, the adult does know the difference between the Wall Street Journal and a source they've never, ever heard of. And kids who've never heard of the Wall Street Journal or that source are in a disadvantageous position. The third kind of knowledge is a different kind of knowledge. And it's something that often students don't have and adults don't have, which is knowledge about the web. Knowledge about search engine optimization and why the first result on Google is not often the best one, how these things are gamed, how, for instance, the .org domain means very, very little. It doesn't mean that anybody has gone through a vetting process of being a social do-gooder. My dog that was sitting on my lap can get a .org if he pays for the fee. And how to, for instance, how to read snippets, those little lines of text under each result in Google. Those things require specific web-based knowledge. So yes, there's the background knowledge is crucial, and I don't want to diminish it at all. At the same time, and now I hope that everybody who's listening to this is sitting in their seats, a lot of mistakes, I don't know what proportion is, but I'm going to come up with a number. 25% of mistakes about organizations and believing that they are credible can be solved by just going to Wikipedia if it's a well-known organization and seeing what Wikipedia says and then jumping down to the references and checking a few of those references out. So Wikipedia has problems, and you can certainly go online and look at all of Wikipedia's problems, but it is the most successful enterprise of crowdsourcing that the human race has ever invented. And so, for instance, with this group that we use in our research, one of the groups, if you put the name of the group into Wikipedia, you will immediately see that it claims to be a think tank, but it's actually a PR firm. And you can immediately know that within 15 seconds. Something an awful lot of people, including smart people, don't.
I've mentioned to you this before, Sam, but I wrote a book with colleagues in 2008 called Best Ideas for Teaching with Technology. And one of the things that we tried to say in 2008 was, hey, this Wikipedia thing is pretty good. It has some problems and has some credibility issues, but boy, is it a great, it might not be the whole pool, but it's a great diving board.
One of the things that may surprise some participants, some listeners, is that when we recorded professional fact checkers at the nation's most respected venues, I can't tell you which ones, but if you were to guess, you'd be right. When we watch them do what they do, often their first stop was Wikipedia. Now, they often use Wikipedia different than your students, but it was an indispensable stop for them, often as the first jumping off point.
And so behooves all of us, I feel like everyone in this call needs to go find 5 other teachers and tell them, like, hey, Wikipedia is okay. Here are some good ways of using it. There's some way that some misinterpretations of Wikipedia. It struck me how remarkably durable some of those ideas have been. Teresa, you were just in the midst of answering Ulrich's question about older learners, and you put a great reference in the chat. But do you want to follow up a little bit on that here?
Yeah, we haven't done any studies specifically looking at how seniors are evaluating information online, but from others' research, I think the picture that's emerging is just as grim or even more grim than the picture we have of how young people are evaluating information online. So we know that that's something that people are starting to pay attention to, and have some friends at the Stanford Longevity Center who are thinking hard about how to reach an older audience. But our research hasn't been specifically about older people, although I will say that some of the professors included in the expert study were, I mean, they were a range of ages, so some of them were a bit older.
Great. I want to give anybody else who's here in the session a chance to ask any questions that you have. And also if any of our panelists or course creators have discussions or questions that you've seen come up in the forums that are worth chatting about, just ping me or raise your hand and you're welcome to jump in. And I'm going to check my notes and see if there's anything else that I wanted to make sure that that I asked and covered. And I think that's most of it from here. You know, as you go along. Oh, one thing that I wanted to say about Unit 2 is that we had a little bit of a snafu with a few pieces of content in the click restraint section. And so if you got there really early, there are a few pieces in 2.5 that we pulled down to fix some images that weren't rendering correctly, and we're going to be putting them back up in the day or two, and we'll put a note there to make sure that you can get all of your click restraint learning that you've been eager for this week. And then next week we'll release Unit 3, which will give you a chance to look at evaluating evidence. And in week 4, we'll have a unit where really we just ask people to work on pulling a bunch of these different kinds of things together, and thinking a little bit about how these kinds of tools and resources can fit into your curriculum, can fit into your own course, can fit into the broader work that's happening in your school. So all of us who are working on the course are really excited about how much participation and how much activity there's been so far. And we want to just keep encouraging you to stay active and remind you that there's still plenty of time for other folks to join. Kareem has a question, which I think is a great one, and one that I'm actually starting to see in some of my social networks. Which is, Sam or Joel or Teresa, do you have any advice about how to approach people who are not students about learning some of these fact-checking things? Actually, part of the reason why this resonates for me is a colleague of mine helps run the digital learning shop over at Harvard. And he sent me and he grew up in rural America and sent me a message which contained a long thread where he was trying to disabuse a longtime friend of his of some pretty out there conspiracy theory beliefs. And he said, you know, please go to this new course that my colleague Justin Reich has made with Sam Wineburg, because I think if you use some of these skills, you might get a little bit more on track. But Sam, do you have any thoughts on engaging people in these ideas that are not students in our classrooms?
Joel has thought about this one, so I'm gonna toss it to him.
Great, yeah, Joel.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that we want to approach people with empathy, right? And to be clear about the fact that this isn't an issue that is restricted to a small group of people, that it's widespread, that we all struggle to evaluate online information, and that this isn't about some smart people know how to do it and others don't, right? Our research showed that professors at very prestigious universities had a great deal of difficulty. Freshmen at Stanford, one of the most difficult universities in the country to get into, did quite poorly on our tasks about evaluating online information. And so I think it's important to start out with an empathetic approach, that this isn't saying, gotcha, you made a mistake, but instead to point out that some of the information online is pretty problematic, and to help people to understand that there are some better ways to approach information on the web, and that it's not about finding a particular type of information, but about finding trustworthy information and to know who's behind it. So it's not that we want people to find information from the left or the right, but rather to have credible sources of information, and that's incredibly important for the functioning of our democracy, that individuals are making decisions based on trustworthy sources of information. And so I think it's crucial to approach it with some care, and not to attack people, but to say say that, you know, we see some ways that work better for evaluating information, and to point out that nobody wants to be duped, and that to help people to understand that there are a few small sets of strategies that can lead us to better sources of information, like asking this question of who's behind it, and leaving a website to find out a little bit more about it. And by doing that, we can come to some better sources, hopefully, and ultimately better decisions that will benefit all of us.
Joel, you mentioned briefly just people's political orientations in there too. And Scott asked this question: have you all gotten allegations of leaning one way or another politically when you teach folks about lateral reading or click restraint? He says, stated differently, have you been accused of being liberal or conservative by advocating that people think independently and search for themselves?
Without a doubt, those concerns have been raised, you know, and I think that in our current hyper polarized environment, it's hard for that not to happen. And so I think for all of us, as we think about teaching these skills, either in informal settings or in informal ones with our friends, that it's crucial to talk about the fact that this isn't about a particular political perspective, but rather finding credible sources of information, and that that no particular part of the political spectrum has a monopoly on spreading problematic content, and that we all benefit if people are finding better sources of information, and importantly, they know where their information is coming from, right? That those are two different things. That, you know, people can have their political beliefs. It's really important that they're basing them at least on trustworthy sources of information, and not based on misinformation or disinformation that is being spread by people who have political agendas and are seeking to warp the political discourse in our country.
That's great. Allison asks a question which I think is interesting here. She frames it as, does click restraint help train Google algorithm to put more trustworthy sources closer to the top of search pages, or is that out of our control? Or put another way, like, are there things that we can do as internet users that help internet companies provide better information for us? Joel or Sam or Teresa, do you have any thoughts on that?
That we could actually have influence to train Google's algorithms just makes me so happy. Even if I want to fantasize for a moment that we could have that
great
power,
idea.
I will lead them. I will get T-shirts printed up of click restraint changes Google's algorithms. That would be absolutely wonderful. I hope so. I mean, what a wonderful bar to aspire to. As of now, even with the number of our participants, maybe we can make a small dent. But again, if you are a lifelong educator, if you don't have optimism, then you have nothing else. So we have to remain vigilantly optimistic. Power.
Yeah, I think that's a great place to think about bringing our conversation to close. That, you know, we're so excited that there could be so many people from so many places around the world that are wanting to make this issue an important one for their students, and want to help build their own capacity around these skills, that want to help other students build their capacity around these skills. And I hope that as you start feeling more proficient with the skills that you're learning in this course, that you keep doing what folks have said before, which is, you know, trying to share what we're learning with others. I hope that you'll invite your colleagues to join us. I hope you'll share the resources of I hope you'll share the resources of the course with your colleagues. Just about everything in the course is released under some form of a Creative Commons license. So the materials from the Civic Online Reasoning website, COR.stanford.edu, are either CC by an attribution license, or I think it's an attribution non-commercial and attribution share-alike license. We have some links for that. And then we have, all the materials that we made new for this course are freely available to share as well. So please do so. A couple of last questions as we're wrapping up. Ulrich asked, can the practical exercises be done in bits and pieces where you save your progress, exit, and come back to complete it later? I think the answer for the practical exercises for the things that are in teacher moments is that if you, I think if you log back in, as long as you keep the sort of same anonymous ID, it will find where you left off and put you back in there if you re-click that link. But Teacher Moments is still a relatively new piece of software that we've been building. And so the safest thing to do might just be to leave a tab open and come back to it. Amelia has this comment from Lucia in the class forum, which would be a great one to get some final thoughts on. Has there been any indication that the type of device has an effect on readers' willingness, ability to engage in lateral reading? A short answer might be, are you more likely to do lateral reading on a laptop, which is big and easy to open lots of tabs, versus a phone, which is small and harder to open lots of tabs? Sam, do you have thoughts on that?
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's trying to figure this out on a mobile device is really difficult. Hence, the kind of what might be your first stop. And if it's an issue of public policy in an organization you've never heard of, then opening up a single tab or just going to Wikipedia could be a quick measure that you take before choosing to forward it to your friends and family. You know, so many of the searches that we go to the web and so much of the digital pollution that we see is by sort of the unscrupulous and unthinking sharing that goes on. And oftentimes just a simple 3-point decision range is extremely helpful. Looks okay, I'm not sure, and get the hell out of here. And so, you know, most of the things that that might be true should probably be in the category of I'm not sure, and I'll check and wait later before I decide to put it up on Facebook or put it on Twitter or make my own TikTok video about it.
That's right. Teresa had a great observation about that in the discussion forums. I think it was last week, the idea that, you know, civic online reasoning skills, lateral reading, and click restraint, they're skills that we can deploy at different levels. We can use them just a little bit and briefly when we're saying, am I gonna share this thing or not gonna share this thing? And then, you know, when there's like, we're deciding on whether or not to vote for a ballot initiative that has lots of media about it, we can go ahead and, you know, wait until we have our laptops and spend a bunch more time digging into those things. So that was helpful for me, something that Teresa posted, this idea of civic online reasoning skills is, you know, for things that are of low stakes, we use them a little bit, and for things that feel higher stakes for us, we use them a lot. All right, well, it's been a wonderful conversation. Candace, I think I think we've got it all set up so that the chat and this webinar will be saved. We'll make sure that the sharing link is available to you, and we'll put the video for this in the weekly updates with the course. We're just so glad that so many of you from so many different places in the world could come and join us. If you need help with things like joining and setting up learning circles, again, post in the forums, reach out to us by email, reach out to us on Twitter, and we'll help try to address all the needs that you have. We're super excited about the incredible level of participation that we've had in the course. There's still time for people to join us. We're still here to help, and that's what we want you to know. So to everybody who came and say hello, thanks for joining us, and really excited to be on this learning journey with you for the next couple weeks. And we'll set up at least one more live event before the semester ends. So thanks everybody, really wonderful to have you all here.